with everybody here. I don't think we have somebody at home today, but I'll post it in here anyways.
Is there any way that you can post the link to the last class? Because I don't think you have that.
Yeah, I hadn't. I just updated my notes. So if you have the link to where I'm keeping all the notes, when I get around to it, but sometimes I forget, I have it at the top here in this class video item. So I just updated them and it's there in that. I also added it to the playlist that I sent out today. Yeah. All right. See, look at that. Questions about software development. That was exactly my topic for today. There we go. That's what I wanted us to talk about. Again, I apologize for not getting homework out. I'll try and get something out to you probably tomorrow because again, I don't think it's not likely I'll spend the, couple hours it's going to take me to throw something together today, but at least by tomorrow I should be able to. But let's do a quick review. So we covered basically two major concepts last time: null and undefined and while loops. So who can tell me, just take a stab at all, describe what null and undefined are, or one of them if you prefer. How about null? All right.
It's like something that has no value.
Something that has no value. Yeah, it's a good description. Okay, now the harder one. She took the easy one. She took null. Undefined. Anyone want to try and? Okay.
It's a variable that hasn't been assigned any value.
It's a variable that hasn't been assigned any value. Yeah, I think that's the best way to say it. They're very, very similar concepts. In most programming languages, you only have the one. In JavaScript, you have both. And remember null, a little gnat up here. Remember null is different than 0 or say an empty string. There's a difference between null or undefined and those, because those have a value. The value is empty string or the value is 0. Null is like no value whatsoever. And then we also covered while loops, but we're gonna go over those a lot in class today. So I don't think we need to spend a bunch of time going over them right now because we'll get a lot of practice with them and review on them. So today, the main topic we're going to introduce are arrays. And this is, arrays are, they're not necessarily huge and complicated like objects are going to be when we start introducing them, but they've got a few tricky aspects to learning how to use them in a programming language. So an array is just a type, just like we've had. What are some of the types that we've had so far? If we did a type of command, what are some of the values we've seen? Seen number and string. Anything else? Bool. Yep. And then null and undefined are actually types too. So an array is a type, although I'm being a little tricky there, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, that it's an item that contains a list of items in order. So that's really all an array is a list of other items in some kind of order. And then there's some properties of arrays. And these properties exist in JavaScript, and they can be slightly different in other languages, but these are the properties of arrays in JavaScript, although arrays are a common concept across pretty much every language. So arrays in JavaScript are dynamically sized. What I mean by that is, and you'll get a lot of examples of this, your array, if you said, oh, I have 3 items to put in an array, that doesn't mean that that array can only ever hold 3 items. We can then put 4, 5, or 500 items into that array if we want to, or we can get rid of all those other items and make it just 3 items in that array again in the future. Arrays are also 0 indexed. Again, we'll get to see what this means in just a second. And in JavaScript, they can be of mixed type, so they can hold values of mixed type. So let's go ahead and create some very basic arrays just as an example of working through stuff so we can try and understand how they work as a hands-on example. So var a equals 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. All right. And I am not in Node. All right. Now I'm going to be lazy because I already typed it once. So this is our first example of declaring an array. What you see there is an array is declared using this sort of square brackets syntax. So when you're declaring an array, strings use single or double quotes. Numbers, you just put the number directly in there. An array uses square brackets, and then the items in the array are separated with a comma. So now if we did console.log a, we're going to see this list of numbers, this ordered list of numbers, come back out. So that's what is in our array, or that's the value of our array. Our array is 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, and 13, all in order. Does that make sense? We'll go over the syntax a lot. It's just sort of the way that arrays are defined. It's pretty common between all programming languages. Now, if you want to declare an array that's just empty, there's no content in it, it doesn't have anything, you can do that too. And you can do that just using the square brackets with nothing else. So if we use just the square brackets and we type like empty array, or we console.log empty array, you can see that what we get back out is just the square brackets. So that's sort of telling us, oh, here's an array, but there's nothing in it. There's actually nothing in the array. And these next two examples are emphasizing what I was talking about. So, well, the food one is just showing you can put strings in an array. We're not limited to numbers or empty stuff. Let's go with some different items as well. So does anybody have a favorite food?
Sushi.
Sushi. All right, we'll add it to our food array. What about another one? Cheese fries. Yeah, me too. All right, so here's our array of food. We'll revisit this again, so keep thinking of other foods you like, because let's make everyone hungry throughout class the whole time, right? Just keep getting hungry. We'll come back and play with this a little more. But this is an array of food, and then we don't even have to just stick with one type. So we can have an array that stores things of different types in JavaScript. Hello, true, 0.1415, 7. Oops. Look, I'm never going to find this array because I spelled it wrong. So mixed types. They don't have to all be one type inside of our array. So that's emphasizing this can be mixed types aspect of an array. But now the question is, all right, what good is this? What value are there in arrays, or what are we getting out of this? And the value is you can store a whole bunch of things sort of together and ordered in a specific order, and then get them back out by referencing their position in the array. So how would we get something out of an array? All right, we've got a few items in our array right here. So let's go ahead and look at, I'll show some examples, then I'll try and show you a mapping that maybe will help out, and we'll talk through that a little bit. And then we'll go through even more examples. So let's say in our food array, we can get back the whole array, but I want to get back one item from it. I use this same square bracket syntax that we used to declare the array. But instead what I pass in is an index for the position of an item in the array. So we give it a number telling it, what position in this array are you at? So let's say I want to get back ice cream out of this array. If you were to take a guess, what do you think I should put in here for a number of its position in the array? 2? 1, 1, 2. Let's try 2. 1. You have to start counting. I did say that, and we haven't gotten into details yet, but yes, I said they're 0 indexed. So let's bring this down and look at this real fast. This is sort of this is what an array sort of looks like in memory. It's this sequential series of positions, and the first one is index 0. And then after that, you've got 1, 2, 3, and so on, just moving up the array. Does anyone find that weird, really odd? Why? Why would you start counting at 0? Yeah, I think it's weird too. So here's how I understand it, and I might be a little off on my explanation, but the way I understand how it works is, you know, I like sort of these physical hands-on examples. So let me take some of these note cards, and I'm just going to put them on the ground here, a little ways away from each other. All right. So let's say I'm right here, standing on, if we call this an array and we've got 5 items in it, and let's say I'm right here on the first item. How many steps do I have to take to get to the first item? None, right? That's sort of why they work that way in a computer, because if you go back to the early days of programming languages, it was essentially you have something that refers to a specific location in memory, and you're saying, all right, how far do I have to go from where I'm starting to get this value? And so that first item, you don't have to do anything. But if I want to get to the second item in the array, I have to take 1 step to get there. And that's sort of why, that's a way to think about why you start at 0. Because you're already at the first position. How many steps do I have to take to get to a certain value in the array? All right, so let's go ahead and do some more examples here. Oops, wrong item. We'll start with a simpler one, and then we'll revisit some of these ones that we just had up there. So I don't have A defined yet, do I? I'll redefine it. RA equals, this may yell at me, I don't know. All right, it doesn't care. So what is the value at A0? 6. All right. And A1? 5. 4. All right. Now let's do a tricky one. It won't make sense. What about A3? 3. And 6. In JavaScript, it happens to be undefined. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So now let's go back up to our slightly more complex ones. So let's look at some of those. Here we had food. So now, revisiting food, what's the index for ice cream in food? 1. All right. And what about cheese fries? 4. Okay. And now let's look at mixed types. So I can prove to you that these really are different types stored in here. Does anyone remember how we look at the type of a variable? Yeah. All right, so let's do type of mixed types of 1. And it tells me I've got a Boolean there, which is true, right? If I do 0, I've got a string. So I really can store different types in my variable, and it doesn't even have a problem with that. And at 3, we have a number. So it's just this nice, simple, ordered list of items of whatever type of item you've stored in it. Now, let's look at type of A, for example. I already told you that these are an array, and we get back object. And I even have to hear my notes. What? Why? Isn't it an array? What's an object anyways, right? And this is a little bit of a precursor. We're going to see objects a lot. Pretty much the rest of the class is going to be talking about objects and how to work with objects and manipulating objects. It's a little quirky, a little annoying that you don't get array. So there's other sort of hacky ways that you can find out that it's an array, which we'll probably learn in the future if you want to know that it's exactly an array. But just know that if you do type of for an array right now, you get back object instead of array or something like that. All right. I said this could be a little confusing. It's a little confusing that you both declare an array using these square brackets, and then you also reference it using those same square brackets. So you'll get used to it in practice, but you can think of it when you're declaring it, right? The square brackets are over on the right-hand side of the equals sign, and when you're referencing, they're just tacked on right after your name of your variable to pull something out. And also the difference is when you're declaring inside of your square brackets, you're telling it what value to store in each one of those positions, whereas when you're referencing it, you're using the index to get back the value out of that position, not the value. You're not putting in the value that you're looking for. And another aspect of it, I already talked about the zero indexed. This leads to a whole world of problems in computer science that are generally known as off by one errors, where everybody probably who's ever written a non-trivial program has had an off by one error in their code where they thought, oh, I'm stepping through everything, but you went one too far or one too short because you happen to be off by one, because we naturally think we count starting at one most of the time. And you're constantly having to adjust that while you're working with arrays in pretty much any programming language. So you'll probably make that mistake. Also leads to one of my favorite programming jokes, although, it's pretty geeky, surprise. And that's that there's only two hard problems in computer science, and that's caching problems and naming things, and off by one errors. So, yeah, told you it's geeky. So now let's go through some more complex exercises. Pretty much the rest of class today, we're going to be working on exercises with arrays. Arrays are a great introduction to objects in the first place. They're our first more complex data type that we're working with that has more than just one value in it, where you have to work with different properties of it. So let's start playing with some of that. Oh, that's way too much code. All right. Let's do this sort of line by line. Var numbers equals 1, 7, 11, and 19. All right. So what do I get if I evaluate numbers 0? It's the easy one. Let's move on to numbers 1. All right. Now let's start getting into some more complex ones. Numbers 1 plus 1. 14? It's 11. Where did 14 come from?
Assuming that you're actually doing a function of 7 plus 7.
Oh, okay. I got it. You get back 11. I get where it came from now. Good. So this gets into, again, learning how to break down code step by step, because code sort of executes from the smallest piece of it out to the larger pieces. So if we're breaking this down, you break it down and say, all right, we have two numbers here, 1 and 1, and we're going to add them. And that's our first step. And when we get out of that is 2. And as a result of that, now we do numbers at index of 2, which gives us 11. Right? Now let's do this, because why not? How about that one?
Two would be for the function.
That would be 14,
Yeah.
right? Because it's evaluating it as the smallest piece it can at first, and it gets numbers at 1, which is 7, and numbers at 1, which is 7, and adds those together. Okay, here's one you won't know the answer to, most likely. Numbers of -1. It's a good guess. It's undefined. It is.
Yeah.
Because how can you have a negative index? Now there are some languages that let you do stuff like that, but not JavaScript. All right, what about numbers of 7? Undefined? Yep. Numbers 18? Yep. Again, this is another difference between JavaScript and some programming languages. Some will throw an error if you ever try and access something outside of the range that exists in that array at that point in time. All right, how about this one? Numbers at string 0. One. Anyone else? Any other guesses? Undefined. We back 1. And the reason for that is JavaScript has type coercion. We talked about this a little before, right? So it's looking at this numbers, this array index, and it says, oh, I expect to have a number here for my index. Yeah. But I got a string. Can I convert this string to a number? Can I do that? I don't know. Let's see what happens if we do like 0 or, oh yeah, toString. Yeah, that's going to work. I'll do it this way. It's actually parse int. Yeah, that's going to work, isn't it? My string goes to a string. Yeah, thanks. So parse int of the string 0. Don't worry about all the details of that. We'll learn more about function calls really soon. Gives me back 0. That's essentially what's happening and why it gets that 0, because it says I need a number here. So can this become a number? And here's one I don't even know what the result here is going to be before I evaluate it. So let's take a guess together. Now I gave you a string that isn't a number. Undefined? Probably 0. All right, it's undefined. Let's see what would happen. A good way to test that here would be like, oh, what happens if I try and parse this int? It tells me it's, well, that's something weird. We won't get into too much detail, but that's not a number, is essentially what that is. That is not a number. Yeah, now let me really confuse you just for a second, but do not worry about this, okay? This is just me being a little goofy to show one of the horrible quirks of JavaScript. We already know that parse int returns not a number, but the type of not a number is number. Because JavaScript is evil. Because it's an evil language, and it wants to be cruel to you. That's the only explanation for that. There is no reason why not a number should be type of number. Okay, rant over. So let's have you guys take a minute and hop into Node, or you could do it in the dev tools or somewhere, and just create a few arrays so you could get used to the syntax yourself for a moment. And I'll check back in just, like maybe 3 or 5 minutes, depending on when your guys' heads are popping up, to see when you're done. And if you want to, you can try accessing some of the stuff in the arrays too and play around with that just a little bit. If you have any problems, let me know, put your hand up. All right, who's done with this so far?
Almost.
Almost. Yeah.
It says that false is not defined.
It says false is not defined. Zero does. Oh yeah, it's not. Because case matters for it. It has to be lowercase. Yeah. That's JavaScript. Some other languages use uppercase. JavaScript, it's all lowercase for false and true.
Can we go back to where you're doing the raisin?
The what?
Like the ice cream, so like you're following them and stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, hold on. Here's my simple reference example right here. Getting some stuff out. All right, who's done now? A little better. People ready to move on? All right. Yeah.
In order to like call something in the terminal, where are you supposed to put it? Because I tried my array and it's not working.
Yes. So what you're going to need to do, yeah, you can, if you're working this way, and you're live coding, it does have to be inside a node the whole time. So instead of calling it the file, just run node directly. And what it'll do is put you inside the node. Now you can write these lines out, or you can cut and paste them if you want into this, and you're sort of working in a live environment where it just reads each line of code as you type it.
So where would try.
Well, it doesn't exist right now because it's this is a whole fresh new environment. Every time you run node, it's a whole fresh new environment, so there's nothing in there. But
So I need to put my array in there?
yeah, you'd have to define this. If you cut and pasted your line, like bar my array, or those two lines, sure.
We just switch it there.
Yeah. So now, like your array is in this environment.
I can just put my
Yeah. But every time you start node, it's fresh. It doesn't have any memory or anything else that you've done. Yeah.
I need to add the
You should, just you didn't have it. Just required in this case, really. Yeah. Great. That's fantastic. It looks like whatever, like, looks like we're using your JavaScript environment, like storing code correctly. And somehow, I don't know why it did this. When it took your array that you created, and instead it turned it into a string and concatenated all of them with commas in between. I honestly don't know why. No clue why that happened. So that's really weird. If instead you did like this, yeah, I bet you it would work in Node, like you terminal like this, and you just type Node and ran it here. I do like that environment. I love this environment because you get syntax highlighting. I don't know why it did that. That's really weird. Yeah, I don't know what happened in that environment. They've got, I'm guessing it may be name itself. They might be doing something special with the variable name in that environment. Like they may have some special logic around it. Really strange.
I tweak it with it first. Assign,
Cool. Yeah. Nice. We would use a new array. This is another way to declare an array. Yep. All right. Looks like people are doing pretty well. I've seen some cool work. You don't have any problems, right? That's working?
That's work.
Sweet. So let's move on to some other aspects of an array. So we've created some. Now let's go ahead and this is we're gonna keep working through this bit by bit, just a lot of hands-on today, a lot of stepping through these things so that you guys can sort of ingrain this, especially the zero-based indexing aspects. So let's create another array. This will be our array that we're creating. And given that array, what is the index for old in that array? All right. About 8. 1. Yeah, you guys are getting this. I had a lot of examples last time because I had a harder time grabbing this aspect. So about true. 7. 7.1. 6. 4. What? 4?
Yeah, I'll say no, all 4.
It's a little bit of a trick question
That's it.
because we have 2 values there. So it could be array 3 or array 8. Both have 4. So now let's do this just to, oh, we haven't learned how to do that yet. I'll do it in a second. All right, what about null? 4 and 9. Yep, we have 2. All right, and what's the length of this array? There's 10 items in it. Remember, we start at 0. So I just showed you already. How do you get the length of the array? We'll look into that in a little more detail, but that's how you get it, and we'll talk a lot more about that. Instead, let's continue working with arrays. Before we can do that, let's do some expressions which include arrays. So not only can you get these individual items out, you can put them in these more complex expressions like we've been using for a little while. So continuing to practice our expressions as well at the same time, let's create some arrays. And then we're going to work through some of these expressions. We'll start with some simple ones again. Like I said, a lot of hands-on today, a lot of working through these problems. So talk to me with your answers. Take guesses. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. The most important thing is to learn. And if you have any questions, like you don't understand why that's the answer that came out, speak up and we can take a little bit of time going over it. So how about odds of 1? 1, all right. And animals 3? Tiger, okay. Now I've already done something like this. Numbers 1 plus 1. 3. And numbers -1. Undefined. Numbers 5 divided by 2. Undefined. It's undefined because 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So it's not a valid number. All right, now we can start putting these things together. What about animals? Numbers 1. Thank you. I'm going to make tons of typos in class. Don't worry. I'll make every mistake. Animals numbers 1.
Okay, so it's going to go animals 2. So it'd be cat.
Cat 2.
So cat.
2.
What?
Say cat 2.
Dog.
It would be dog. It would be dog.
It's dog. Any confusion over why?
Yes.
All right. Great. So let's, again, think about breaking stuff down, solving them from the inside out, right? So if we start, suspicious of their giggles. I'm good. We start in the middle. We've got 1, so that's an index. We already have a number there, so we don't have to do anything else. And in the numbers item, we go to numbers 1, which is 2. So now we've solved that for a number, which is 2. And now we can use that as our index for animals. So 0, 1, 2 gets us the dog. All right, what about odds 3 plus numbers 1 less than 2?
False.
False? All right. People understand how to break that down? Okay. Let's do a similar one, but just slightly different. What about that?
False.
It's true, because odds 3 is 1, numbers 1 is 1, and 2 is less than or equal to 2. And now how about bools 3 and bool 0? True. It's true. You don't get that one? All right, again, break it down bit by bit. So bools at 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3 is true. So that part's true. So that means we go ahead and evaluate the second half of this and statement. So bools at 0 is true. So true and true. We go ahead and spit out true. All right, let me make this console a little smaller so you guys can see the arrays up there still while we work with this last one. So the odds 10 or bool 0.
Yeah. Probably true. Wait, never mind, undefined.
You get true and put undefined. All right, let's break it down. What is odds of 10?
Undefined.
Undefined. Okay. So an undefined is truthy or falsy?
Falsy, right?
It's falsy. So that part's false, but this is an or statement, which means since it's not true, we have to evaluate the second part. And the second part is true, which means the whole statement is true for an or statement. Yeah, because if we did like not odds at 10, it's false. That's sort of a way to test the falsiness or truthiness of a statement of just about anything, is to do sort of this double exclamation, because you're taking the negative and then the negative again, which should bring you back to your original value, except it also happens to convert it to a Boolean. It's like not 1 is true, but not 0 is false. Because 0 is falsy, 1 is truthy. It's a little shorthand for doing that you run into a lot. Cool. So you guys are doing really well at accessing the values in an array. Now let's talk about modifying them. So we already did, we've changed values in variables before, right? We've had a variable like foo equals hello, and then we can change it to be something else, right? And so we're used to that. But you can do the same thing with values inside of arrays, including changing the existing values. And again, it just goes back to using this indexing syntax to do that, which means let's go ahead and create this array. So now we have a very simple array with 1 being true in it. And we can change these values. So if we do array of 0 equals 5, and what are the values in our array now? 5 being true. Yep. All right, first couple ones are going to be easy. Now we do array at 2 equals false. The values in our array.
5B false.
5b false, right? Because we're changing our array. Okay. Array at 0 plus 1 equals c. What did our array have? 5c false. Now we're going to throw some tricky ones at you. Array at 3 equals 10. Now what's in our array?
Not for the last array with another.
5B false and 10.
5c false and 10. Yep.
That's it to the end of
It did. Now let's keep that going. Array 5 equals 66. Now what's in our array?
5C false.
Would be 5C false 10
Well, you
undefined
skipped
66.
the 4. So
We didn't do a 4.
undefined.
We didn't do a 4.
There we go. I like this conversation. I like this back and forth.
Is it gonna fit 4 as undefined since you didn't?
No, I can't even tell what it is. What?
Just leaves it blank.
Well, hold on. Let's check. Type of array at 4 is undefined. Yep. What you can, this is in JavaScript. This is in some dynamic languages. A lot of the compiled languages, C, Java, they have much stricter rules around how arrays work. You can't do this type of stuff. In JavaScript or I think Ruby and some of these other languages, you can assign stuff to any position, even if it hasn't been in that array before. And it will expand that array until it has that position to put that value in. And anything that it needs to add to the array to get there, it just has as undefined. But they are part of the array, and we've looked at that just a little bit, but the length of our array is now 6. So that undefined value did get added to our array, and it's part of it. It explicitly has undefined, but it doesn't have anything in there. And this is sort of quirky behavior. It's nice that it's very flexible like that, but it can also be dangerous if you didn't intend to put something somewhere like that. And it's also dangerous because what happens if I try and access an item that is outside of my array's index? I get undefined. So getting undefined back from an array access doesn't mean that I'm outside of the array. I could still be within the bounds of my array and get undefined. All right, so working with our array more, let's bring it back up so you guys can see what it was. Now let's do array 1 equals null. And what do we think our array looks like now? 5, 10, false, 5, null, false, 10, undefined, and 66. Yep. All right, and just one more. See that? Should have shown the array again beforehand because now you guys don't have the reference for it. But what do you think went into index 2 for this array now?
False.
False? It's false. Because that's false. All right. Are there any questions so far about changing values in an array? How you can manipulate these array values? Yes?
When would this be? What would you apply this to?
When would you use an array?
Like something like this. When is it functional to do something like this?
We'll definitely have some homework assignments where we go over that. There's a lot of code. In fact, it's becoming even more popular right now as a certain style of programming, where what you basically do is iterate over all the values in an array and do some action. So let's say, for example, let's do something really simple here. Var numbers equals 1, 2, 3. And I want to have some, these, let's say these numbers came from somewhere else. Let's make them different numbers so they're not, so trivial. 2, 13, and 76, right? So let's say these numbers, I don't know where they came from, but what we want to do is go ahead and square all these numbers, right? So if you wanted to do that with a whole series of numbers, this is having them in an array like this is where you might do that. But another great example is we already have our foods. Oh, it doesn't exist in this environment. So let's go ahead and recreate it. Var foods equals pizza. All right. I said I wanted to call some out. Name me some foods. Nachos. What else you got?
Curry.
Curry. Did I hear Thai? What? Tacos. Steak. Okay. So here we've got a nice list of foods, and we can add more to this very easily. Now imagine instead, if we didn't have an array to work with these, that we wanted to have this list of foods in our code. Given the tools that you already know of so far, what other ways could you create a bunch of these sort of food variables? We probably have to create a separate one for each one of these, right? Like var pizza equals pizza. And var nachos equals nachos. But then if I wanted to work with these together in some way, I wanted to walk through every one of these foods and tell it which, or just print them out so I can say which ones I like. Oh, which foods out of these foods do you like? It would be much, much harder to do that if I couldn't store them together in some sort of way. Another really useful tool for arrays, I talk about how they're ordered, right? So we've got these numbers here, and they're in a very specific order. An array is a really useful way to do something like, let's say, I'm not 100% sure this exists in JavaScript, but I think it does. To sort the values. I don't think it did exactly what I wanted. I know what it did, but an array is a really useful way to work with stuff like that, like sort them, or you might sort alphabetically for words. So if we had that foods array and we want to sort it alphabetically, you can do that. Now, there's some magic going on, why the numbers didn't work, why the food worked. I wouldn't worry too much about it right now.
Because you put the ones at the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's putting from like 10, 0, 0.
It was looking at the first digit in the numbers when it did the comparison. It wasn't using the whole number. And that's because by default, the sort in, and we haven't talked about methods and stuff like that, but by default, sort does a string sort. So it converted these to strings. And so when you convert those to strings, 1 comes before 2, comes before whatever. But those are some instances where you want to use them, and then we'll definitely show some more, and some of the homework assignments I think will help emphasize that. But they're used all over the place. Another great example, if you want to think of real world stuff, is when Google gives you back search results. Basically what it does is it returns an array of everything for each page. So when you're on that first page, it sends back, here's the array of items, and then its code on the front end, or its back end code, walks through that array and renders the HTML for each one of those so that you get the search results for their page. And then when you click the next one, it says, oh, here's your next array of items, render those and show those to the user. That way you don't have to store all of that HTML. You only have to return other information. You can convert it to HTML based off those items. All right, so we've sort of seen one way to add an item to an array, and that was if we wanted to add it not to replace a value, but to add it. How did we do that already?
You just added to the space or anything that has to be used.
Yeah, you just used a different index, one that doesn't have a value, right? Well, there's other ways to do it, ways that are, in a sense, safer, or so you're always putting it on the end. So for example, array.push is the common way to add something to the end. So if we have our array here, and we do array.push 42, what we get back, or what the array is now, is the same array we had before, but with 42 pushed onto the end of it.
So it gives you the position of what you're adding.
Nope, it gives you the length. What it returns is the length, yeah. When you call push, it returns the length, the new length of your item, your array. Because it thinks that's probably the most likely piece of information you're going to want after you've added something to your array. How long is my array now? That's sort of why it chose to do that. But you can see it just pushed it onto the end. And we can do that again. And just sort of push things onto the end. You can do that with, that's the safest way to do it. That's the most supported way, probably the most common way that you'll run across. We won't go into much here on this, but does anyone want to try and take a guess? And somebody may know the answer. If you do, know it because you've done it in another language. give someone else a moment to try and guess first. Anyone want to guess if I wanted to take an item off the array, just get rid of it? If I did push, remove. You're getting really close. It's pop. Pop pulls the last item off of the array. It's you push and you pop if you're working with stuff like that. That's not something we'll probably work with too heavily today, but we might do more with it in a little while. So the other way that we've already looked at is you can obviously just use an index. But how do you know if you're trying to add it to the very end and grow your array by just one item and not put undefined items in there? How do you know where to put your item if you're using that index reference? So if we were to use this sort of index style and we want to add something right to the end of our array to grow it by one, how would we do that? It's tough. I don't know if I've necessarily answered it, but in order to do that, what you'd need to know is how long is my array right now? What's the length of my array? Because I need to know where to put this item if I'm using this index reference, right? I've sort of shown that a little bit, but the way that you get that is with array.length. So this is where I'll get into some of this object referencing. Arrays are objects. They're really the first objects that we've encountered in our class so far. We've worked with very primitive types so far. Numbers, Boolean, string. But now we're getting into a much more complex object, or type, and that's known as an object. We'll get into a lot more detail of objects in the next few classes, but the most basic concept of an object is objects can have properties. And that's true for anything in the real world. Let's look at these headphones for a split second. I just have these headphones here. What are some properties of these headphones? They're over ear. They've got cushions. They're black. They're Bluetooth, right? You know, they have an adjustable headband. They say Plantronics here. Those are all properties of these headphones. And so an array in JavaScript is an object, and every object has certain properties. And it makes sense that one of the properties that an array would have, because one of the most logical properties for it is its length. So whenever you're accessing a property on an object, you use this dot syntax to do that. And we've already used this dot syntax at least in one other place in our class so far. Does anyone remember where we've used this dot syntax?
You did it when you changed a number to a string or actually went from string to something else with string dot.
Yeah, I've done that. You guys are using, yeah? Console.log, there we go. You guys use it all the time when you're writing out, right? It's no coincidence that that syntax is the same between them. We'll definitely get into more detail there, but there's the reason you use that same syntax for console.log and array.length is because you're doing the same thing. So if or something similar at least. So based off that, does anyone want to take a guess what type of object console is? What? It's an object. That dot syntax is connected with working with objects. So you guys have already been working with objects. It was just sort of a piece of magic so far, console.log. You're going to get a lot more experience with working with objects and this dot syntax and how all of that works. But we can start using this more directly now. Let's go ahead and create another array here. And then we can get the length of that array, or any array, directly like this. So let's say we want to add another hero to the end of this array, and we want to use this sort of bracket notation or bracket syntax to do it. Does anyone have an idea for how we might do that? Yeah? We could put 3, we could. But let's say we don't know how many items are in it right now. But we want to add it at the end. So we can do push. Yep. So let's look at an array here and sort of put these things together. So if we had this one, and this one's going to have 5, 7, 9, and 11 in it. If we look at this as an array, what would the length of this be? 4. So it has a length of 4. And what's the index of the last item in the array? 3, right? Because this is 0. And this is 3. So if we want to use this bracket notation and add something to the end of this array, we've already seen that whatever you put inside of those brackets gets evaluated by JavaScript. It doesn't have to be just a number directly. It will evaluate the rest of the expression. So we want to take a guess what we can put in there to put something on the end of this. Because we want to get an index. We want to get a number. How can we get a number into these brackets?
You can do 2 ways. You can do push, where you can do array, push, and then you can put in whatever you want to put in there, and it adds it to it. Or you can do array, bracket, and then 4, and then do equal sign, and add whatever you want that way.
We can do 4. Let's add a hero to the end here. Anyone want to give me one? Batman. All right. So now I want to add another hero to the end here, but I don't know how many are already on it.
It did another fine stage.
So I can't do 4 directly. There we go. Heroes.length equals, let's put another.
Static shot.
What? Who is this?
You need to get on your comics, dude.
What? Is that right? Did I spell it right?
Static shot.
Static shot. Okay. Okay. I'm good. I got it now. I don't know if it's 2 words or not, but. Shock.
Shot.
Yeah, I know. It was a cartoon. I should know this. I watched the cartoon. All right. It looks like it added him to the end of the list. Oh, somehow I added something that I shouldn't have here, I think.
I think Batman should have 3 instead of 4.
Batman should have been 3 instead of 4.
Because the ring is 3.
Yeah.
Ah, all right. I made a mistake of a what?
+1.
Off by 1 error. Yep. So the key there is when you're trying to add something in to the end of an array, you do want to get the length, but it's length minus 1. So do the computation in there like, well, the length should, let me see, the length should work, but yeah, if you're doing it the other way, statically putting it in there, you would have needed the right. 4 should have worked. Let me see. 0, 1, 2. Oh yeah, we only had 2.
Yeah,
Because I had 4 up there.
Yeah, you had 3
Yep.
there.
Yep, I had 4 up there. So those are the types of mistakes that you'll end up making. Wouldn't worry too much about it. But does that make sense how you could put something at the end using that bracket syntax without, or notation, and you wouldn't even need to know how long it is? Because you can just get the value of its length already? Yeah? All right, so we have one last topic to cover. Oh, we're running a little short. I thought we'd have a little more time. If nothing else, I'll have a lot of these as just samples that you guys can run and get a feel for. But now that we've had these arrays, we've got a bunch of arrays, how can we enumerate these? How can we walk through them? That's what I was telling you about before, right? You want to walk through them and see all of the values or do something with them. So we learned about while loops in the last class. Does everyone remember working with while loops and sort of how to work with them? I'll go ahead and just take this and put it up in here just to refresh people's memory real fast. Oops. Obviously missed the first character. This is a very basic while loop that we've put in up here. And what do we think it's going to do when I run this?
All right, 1 equals 42.
What's that?
Yeah, that's what-
It will. What's going to get output?
1, 2, 1, 42.
That's a tricky one.
Does that make sense? Because I'm not actually outputting the number. I'm just outputting this log information each time. And at the end, all right, we've got the right number. But does this sort of make sense? Not too complex or hard? All right. So now we'll introduce working with these looping and arrays, because you can loop over arrays using the same while loop that we were using before. We've learned all of the properties of arrays that we need for it. Did I not capture this? I must not have copied it correctly. All right, let's try this again. Here we go. So we've got a pretty simple array. And then we just go ahead and set an extra variable. We set index, and we set it to 0 before we start our loop. And then inside of our while loop, we're checking, as long as our index is less than the length of the array, run the while loop. And inside of there, we'll just log the values, and we'll increase that index so that it keeps moving up. Because remember, whatever your condition you're checking in a loop is, you want to make sure that you're changing it so that eventually you'll end the loop, right? So we're checking index versus length, so we should be changing one of those values. In this case, we're changing the index to make sure that that changes over time. So what'll output if we run this one? So do people understand why this is the result? Basically what it did was, we've got an array, and then at the start of the while loop it says, is 0 less than whatever the length is, which happens to be, what, 7 for our array, right? So is 0 less than 7? Yes. So then it goes into the while loop. It logs the current value using the index, so array.index, which is right now 0. And then it increments that index and comes back to this and says, all right, is 1 less than 7? Yeah. So then we're going to output 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's how you can iterate over all of the values in an array in some way. Does that make sense? We're going to have a lot of examples of this type of stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about it with just one example. Hopefully it'll make sense with a lot more. So let's do something that's just a tiny bit more complicated, not much. And let's, in our loop, instead of just outputting the values directly, let's do something to them. So let's add 5 to each item in our array, and then output the values of our array. And in fact, let's do this too, just to prove this a little bit. Let's add a console log of our whole array at the end, so you guys can see that too. That now we've walked through, and we're adding 5 to each item in our array, and we're putting that value back in that same position in the array. So we're getting the value at this index, adding 5 to it, and writing it back to that same position. And we're logging it. And at the end, we log the whole array just to show that, yeah, the values in this array actually did change. And now we're getting into where there's a lot more utility and use of working with an array, because now once you can step over all the items in the array, you can do a lot more things with it.
That way you can eliminate have to working with multi-dimensional array.
What? What are you talking about? There's a lot of different ways to do this. We'll introduce them piece by piece, but maybe not everything either, conceptually. But yeah, there's other ways to write this that would make it a little easier or a little different. Any big questions over that? No? All right, we'll go over at least a couple more examples, I think, real fast, and then probably be done. So we can also combine more logic. Remember before we did a little bit of combining loops with if statements, like we just had an example above, sort of. Well, let's add even more logic in here, and we'll combine this while loop with an if statement with an array. And does anyone want to try and take a glance at this and figure out what the output is going to be for this program? It's a little trickier. Maybe you guys forgot what that operator does. If anyone's not sure, you can ask. Any general guesses? Does somebody want to try and step through it the first couple passes through the loop and see what it would do? All right, so let's start at the top. In our first pass, what's our index going to be? 0, which is less than 7. So we're going to go in, right? So then this logic here is if, what's the value going to be here? 1, because we're looking at array at position 0. And then maybe this is throwing people off. Anyone remember what that is? What? It's called modulus, or you might think of it like remainder. So it's saying divide by 2 and the result, give me the remainder of this. So if you divide 1 by 2, what's the remainder? Of 1 divided by 2? What? Well, if you can only use integers, so you can't do that. So let's do one that might be easier. If you divided 3 by 2, the remainder is 1, right? Because you divide once, you can do that once, but what's left over is 1. So 1 divided by 2 is, or modulus 2, what's the remainder?
0.
It's 1. Because you can't divide by it, so you don't get the actual value. All you're getting is the remainder out of these. So let me show some examples of that to help reinforce it. This remainder. Let's do like something a little bigger. Let's do 7 mod 5. You know what that's going to be? 2, because it's what's left over after the division, right? So if we did 9 mod 5, it would be 4. And then if we did 3 mod 5, it's 3, because it's 0 and then remainder of 3. So it might be a little tricky at first, but for the 0, but that's what we have here. So this will say 1 mod 2, which gives us 1 remainder of 1, and 1 isn't equal to 0. So we're not going to run this if block. So we'll step through. Now we have an index of 1, right? Because we incremented it. So 1's still less than 7. So now here, the array at index 1 is 0, 1, Yep. So 2, remainder 2 is?
It's one.
Zero.
It's 0. There's nothing left over. So then we'll go ahead and log that. So in other words, what we should be logging with this program are any even numbers passed into that are part of this array. So this is sort of starting to build stuff together. It's getting more complex. We're putting pieces together. I think we're at time now, and I want to respect your time. So let me take a look at what we have for the remaining examples. I just had a couple more. We can go over those quickly to review at the beginning of next class. And that way you guys can get out of here. If you have any questions,